it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Feeling.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable.
This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Super tough. Like one of my buddies, he runs a dojo, and I do karate sometimes. And
have you heard of it? It's called Rex Kwon Do.
Yeah, literally. And I was like, oh, so you're lame. And he was just like some pencil pusher. But they dress up like that, and I hate it. I hate the cowboy cosplay. And the same thing with these like last clients, where I was just like, you guys, okay, whatever.
I'm waiting for that guy that you did work with to be like, do you think I'm a failure because I go home to Starlight at night?
They just like drive home in their $60,000 car listening to Culture Wall and just be like, that's me. Like, no, it's not, dude.
I don't like really want to pick on anybody, but if any of our listeners out there, if you're sitting there at home thinking, wait a second, I have a Punisher skull sticker on my car. I hate to tell this to you. You gotta change. Like,
you gotta do something.
Stop that nonsense.
Like,
I don't know what you're thinking. Everybody sees that, just goes, douche alert.
A little bit. Like, I don't know, man. Maybe we'll cut this out, but that is at least my humble.
I'm not cutting it out, man. I'm sorry. Come at me, bro. I don't care. Like, it's
They're
just
gonna punish you, dude.
Oh, that's
You're gonna
true.
get so punished.
Oh no. Oh, punish me, Daddy.
No. But yeah,
that is the vibe it gives off. We're like, I'm gonna punish you. Oh, I'm gonna spank your bottom, bare bottom. It's like, yeah, okay, guy, cool.
I get it. You're tough.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know. It's just like, and there is a difference between somebody being like that guy who was helping with the fences, who couldn't do it. I'm sure he could probably kick my ass, but he doesn't know how to put up a fence. And it's like, being physically dominant in like a fighting scenario and being actually useful as like a working person are two different things. And I don't think that those aesthetics should be the same. You should not dress like a cowboy just because you go to the gym.
Also,
you should dress like a cowboy because you rustle cattle. You deal with cattle or something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and I also don't think that guy could kick your ass, because I feel like the people that can kick your ass are the ones that never say they can. They're just like, yeah, I do kickboxing.
That is true.
And they just like very casual about it. They're not boastful or whatever. The ones that are like, no, I do like jiu-jitsu all the time, bro. You're like, all right, calm down.
There's a guy. There's a knife maker in the UK called Dies in Every Film. That's his Instagram, right? And he is this absolute just monster when it comes to like mixed martial arts and fighting. And if you look at any of his videos, they are the dumbest videos. He's wearing like Crocs with like little glitter plugs in the Crocs and like booty shorts.
Nice.
And just like doing the dumbest, silliest stuff. And I was like, that guy could kill me for sure.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Like it's like the meme that always goes around with like Jackie Chan in the crop top, where they're like, if you're Jackie Chan, you can wear whatever you want.
Yeah,
it's just like,
true.
That's true. Like, but the me more cowboy than you thing is just get over it, dude. Like,
I agree. It feels like you're projecting something, but
yeah,
whatever, here nor there. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Biographers.
Hello.
I'm Daniel Newman with Akiva Miola.
How you doing?
We're about to get going into Pancho Villa Part 3. Excuse our silly, weird nonsense talk about cowboys and
dude, we're not judgmental.
Pseudo-masculinity.
We're literally not judgmental.
Before we get going, though, a couple things to quickly mention. First and foremost, if anybody likes the show and wants to support us, you can do so on our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. I also wanted to ask if anybody is enjoying the show as well. I haven't been doing this every episode, but I try to every once in a while sprinkle it in to say, hey, if anybody wants to throw in a review somewhere on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever, it'd be much appreciated. It always makes us look good and boosts up our numbers and all that fun stuff.
Yes. Love to hear reviews from you. Just good to hear from you guys. It's
totally.
Awesome.
Also wanted to give a quick shout out to a gentleman named Paul Klatfelter. He is a new subscriber to Patreon, but I did also learn, it was funny. I got the notifications like, hey, you have a new Patreon subscriber. And it was just Paul. And I was like, oh, cool. So I send Paul a message and I just said, hey, really appreciate your support. It means a lot to us, yada, yada, yada. And he responded and said, yeah, I was really glad your mom posted this on Facebook. I've been going through Marilyn Monroe and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wait, hang on. Is this Paul Klatfelter? So Paul is an old friend of mine. He was a friend of my sister-in-law's. They met when he was living out in Kansas. He actually DJ'd my brother's and sister-in-law's wedding. Yeah. And then we ended up just becoming friends or whatever. So just want to give a quick shout out to Paul. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
Was that the same guy who sent in that suggestion for a different?
No, that was somebody. I can't remember what that person was.
Was he also a Patreon subscriber?
I don't think so, but I could be wrong about that. Okay. Forgive me.
At some point, we gotta talk about him because I do want to do some research on his suggestion.
Sure, we did have somebody reach out to us though from our website. Actually, I want to say their name was Christy. I'm fairly confident of that. And they basically just said they mentioned something about the Ian Fleming series. Apparently, there was a point where we were talking about a movie, and the movie that we were referencing, we couldn't figure out what it was. It was called The Mighty. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you remember that movie. It was from the 90s, I want to say, or like late 90s. Anyway, though, Christy was very kind and said, loved the show and loved learning about history while also having a laugh. So that made me happy.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we like the reviews, really. It's just to stroke our ego.
No. Look,
that's why I like the reviews.
Sure. But like genuinely, it does mean a ton to me when somebody says, hey, you made learning fun. Like that's the goal, I think a lot of people can find history boring, but I like that how we approach it and say, we're going to do it from the lens of this one specific person. And then through them, we're going to show you who they were. They were just a human being too. And here are the events that they were a part of. That actually is really fun. That's just a good story. That's just a good narrative. I think a lot of times history can get lost in the weeds of, well, we need to understand the socioeconomic climate of the French Revolution. In order to do that, we need to talk about these two political groups. And you're like, okay, you're losing me, right?
Yeah.
But if it's like, hey, we're going to talk about Marie Antoinette. And here's what she was all about. But meanwhile, there was these two other political groups that were doing this, right? And they were looking at Marie going, this is not cool. And then it becomes a cooler story.
Less luxury, more story based.
Exactly. Yeah. Where it feels like it's like a movie or something like that. So anyway, I really like it. All right, buddy. You ready to get going here into part 3?
Let's do it.
I'm stoked. This is, I personally, so far, I think this is my favorite episode. It's pretty cool. I was proofreading it the other day and I was like, this is pretty solid. So I hope that my narration can actually do it justice here.
I'm sure it will.
All right. Well, last time we saw the Mexican Revolution fully kick off with a man named Francisco Madero as the leader. It was slow goings to start, but with the aid of revolutionary fighters like Pancho Villa and Pascual Orozco, battles were won and the longtime dictator Porfirio Diaz finally stepped down as president, with Francisco Madero being elected president soon after. Though this was a major victory, all was not well for Madero in his new presidency. In an attempt to maintain order, Madero kept many political and military leaders in power who had previously been loyal to Porfirio Diaz, whilst snubbing his revolutionary compatriots who felt they were owed a position in the new government. Through all of this, Pancho remained loyal to Madero and was even named honorary general, quote unquote, in the new federal army. but soon found himself targeted by Federal General Victoriano Huerta, who accused Pancho of various crimes and sentenced him to death. Where we left off last time, a 35-year-old Pancho had just managed to escape prison, making his way to El Paso, Texas, to live in exile. But while he was away, trouble was brewing in Mexico, and Madero would soon find himself dealing with a coup aimed at taking him down. See, since Madero took over as the newly elected president, he had kind of failed to make any one party happy, and there were 4 revolts in the first year of his presidency. The revolutionaries felt slighted because the people of Mexico had not been given their land back, and the military leaders of the revolution hadn't been given permanent ranks. The people who had previously held power with Porfirio Diaz weren't happy either, because many of their powers had been stripped, and they felt Madero was being too kind to the revolutionaries. For the most part, the revolutionary forces were willing to give Madero a longer chance to prove himself, but many from the old federal government were not. So, 2 generals from the federal army named Bernardo Reyes and Felix Diaz, who was Porfirio Diaz's nephew, plotted a rebellion with the primary goal being to capture Francisco Madero and take back the government. On Sunday, February 9th, 1913, a group of federal soldiers broke both Reyes and Diaz out of prison, and the crew headed to the capital. Thousands of spectators showed up to watch, and Reyes was described as looking like he was in a parade. Apparently, Reyes had quite a bit of hubris, as he was sure that once Madero's troops saw them coming, they would lay down their guns and surrender. But he was wrong. Upon entering the main square of the National Palace in Mexico City, Madero's men opened fire, and Reyes was shot and killed. It was chaos.
Well, that was quick.
I know. Really, really quick.
It was like, I got this. Oh.
Literally, like, done very, very quickly. Now, it was chaos. A panic broke out with the rebellious troops scattering and shooting everything in sight. When the dust had settled, over 400 bodies littered the streets, and roughly 1,000 people were injured.
Jesus.
While this was happening, Felix Diaz, the other leader of the coup, headed to the city arsenal, the Ciudadela, and took control of the government's entire arsenal of weapons and ammo. From there, Felix Diaz and his troops began firing cannons across downtown Mexico City. Buildings were destroyed and civilians were killed. Madero needed troops and arms, so he quickly headed to Cuernavaca, some 60 miles south, and by the very next day, Monday morning, he returned with a train full of troops and weapons. Between February 11th and 12th, the federal forces and rebels hammered one another with cannon fire. More buildings were destroyed, and more soldiers and civilians died, with bodies peppering the city streets. But Madero was convinced he could squash the uprising. He had made General Huerta, the man who had previously tried to execute Pancho Villa, the commander of the capital forces, and was sure that Huerta would lead him to victory. But what Madero had not counted on was betrayal.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, I had a feeling. It's just, he's working in this scenario where it's all mixed parties, and nobody actually is 100% on his side at this point.
Nope.
The rebels don't really like him because they think he's a bootlicker. The federales don't really like him because they think that he's, giving credence to criminals.
Yep.
So.
Yep. It's a lose-lose, basically. See, General Huerta was a bit of a bastard and was bitter that after Madero had taken power, he did not make Huerta the Minister of War. So on February 11th, General Huerta held a secret meeting with Felix Diaz and declared his loyalty to the coup. Once hands were secretly shaken, Huerta ordered former revolutionary troops to be stationed at vulnerable positions, allowing the rebel forces to decimate the revolutionary troops by machine gun fire, tipping the scales towards the rebels.
Wow. And also, that's kind of one of the shittiest ways to betray your own group, is by setting it up so that the people that are under your direct command are just cannon fodder.
Literally. So it wasn't
even like, I'm going to remove my troops out of the city and let y'all take it. I'm going to pose them up as puppets and just let them get mowed down. That's insane. That's evil.
Yeah.
He was a federale before everything broke out, right?
Correct. He was
insane.
under Porfirio Diaz's umbrella, right?
Wow.
So when Madero was like, "Hey Huerta, we need you, save the city," he was like, "I got you, bro." Secretly, I don't. And then was like, you revolutionary troops, over to this spot. We need to defend this area. And in his mind, knowing, he was like, that spot is friggin' like no man's land.
Yep.
You're going to get slaughtered. And that was his whole thing, was like, take out as many of the revolutionary troops as I can, but under the guise that I'm doing it as a military commander trying to defend the city.
Wow.
Devious, right?
Super devious.
Devious.
Mad evil.
Now, a few days later, on February 15th, calls for Madero's resignation were growing louder. Ambassadors from the US, Spain, Germany, and Great Britain were all pointing the finger at Madero, and the sitting US president at the time, William Howard Taft, refused to send aid when Madero asked. On February 16th, a temporary ceasefire was agreed upon to bury the dead and remove civilians from the war zone. On February 17th, General Huerta's treachery was complete, as he arrested Madero's brother, Gustavo, before storming the National Palace and personally arresting Francisco Madero and his vice president. On February 8th, shit really hit the fan. General Huerta and Felix Diaz met with the U.S. ambassador, and together they created what is now known as the Pact of the Embassy, which established a new government after the success of the coup and placed none other than General Huerta as the provisional president.
What? So the betrayer became the president?
Correct.
Fuck.
I told you it's Game of Thrones.
That is messed up. And you said that it was the Treaty of the Embassy?
Treaty of the Embassy.
So the U.S. basically had their own stand-in guy that they were sponsoring.
The U.S. ambassador in Mexico City was basically like, now it should be known that it wasn't at the direction of Taft. He was actually later removed as the ambassador to Mexico for his part in all of this U.S. ambassador.
Gotcha.
I can't remember what his name is, but he was basically the one going like, yeah, we don't want Madero. It's actually not good for like trade. So if we can take him out and put somebody else in place and establish a new government,
a little bit more understanding.
This is better. And so it was like very much at the
but then
direction of the U.S. ambassador.
How does Pancho become governor if the person who tried to assassinate him becomes president?
Oh, buddy, we'll get there. It's pretty sweet.
Because I'm guessing Huerta did not just like hand it to him on a silver platter.
Oh no. Buddy, hang on. We're gonna get there.
Okay.
It's good stuff. Trust me. It's really, really, really fun stuff. Okay, so where were we? Now, the sitting U.S. President William Howard Taft actually preferred Mexico under the control of a dictator, as it made imports cheaper. So he was all for Madero's removal.
That is just so shitty. And like, Americans might not understand this, but this is why a lot of Latin Americans kind of roll their eyes sometimes when it comes to like American interference in Latin America.
Yeah.
Because we're like, we believe in freedom and voting, but also our major imports of oil and iron and textiles are much cheaper if you guys are oppressed. So
Correct.
Can we keep that going? Like, I want democracy for me, but but dictatorship for you is fine so long as things are cheap. So shitty.
Now, Huerta then forced Madero to resign to give the coup an air of legality, before gleefully sending a letter to U.S. President Taft saying, quote, "I have the honor to inform you that I have overthrown this government. The armed forces support me, and from now on, peace and prosperity will reign."
Yeah, prosperity will reign.
Yeah. Dude, check this out. Now, as a sick form of revenge, Huerta's newly appointed Secretary of War, Manuel Mondragon, handed over Madero's brother Gustavo to a mob of his soldiers, who beat him, tortured him, and ripped out his eye, all before peppering his body with bullets and throwing him into a shallow grave.
They're like rabid dogs.
Literally, dude. I mean, I was shocked when I was reading this. Like,
oh my God.
Good Lord. And this was Madero's brother and like trusted advisor, Gustavo. He like,
how can you be doing that and think, yeah, I'm on the right side of history?
I don't know, man. I think so many of these people were borderline psychopaths, right? to where, or I don't even know how you would describe it, because I mean, people come back from even like World War II and they're like, man, the things we did because we were marching under the banner of war and it was crazy times.
Yeah.
Like US troops have came back from all these, like from Vietnam, and we're like, dude, the things I firebombed villages. I watched children, run on fire.
There is like a certain mob mentality.
Awful things, that.
But there's also the thing of like positions of power often attract people who maybe shouldn't be in positions of power.
Yeah. For sure. But anyhow, it's just, again, I can't make any excuses for it, but it was just one of those more shockingly violent things that I read. Now, on February 20th, Huerta was named president. Francisco Madero and his vice president were told they would be sent off to Cuba to live in exile and that arrangements were being made. But on the night of February 22nd, 1913, while being transferred between prisons, Francisco Madero and his vice president, Jose Suarez, were shot and killed by 2 soldiers from Huerta's army, almost definitely by his command.
Wow.
By the end of the 10 tragic days, more than 5,500 soldiers and civilians were dead. From El Paso, Pancho could do nothing but hear newspapers read aloud detailing the insanity and horror of the 10 tragic days, the assassination of his friend Francisco Madero, and the utter collapse of the revolution he had helped to build.
That's insane. It's also like, it's so frustrating because Madero was not perfect.
No.
And he
inherited a terrible situation.
Yes, he inherited a wildly terrible situation. And he made a couple of mistakes by trying to grab the reins too firmly. And he made a couple of mistakes by not grabbing the reins at all in some cases. But like it's like being dropped into an F-16 while it's already in the air and you've never flown a plane before. Like you're just hoping to press buttons to see if you can keep the thing, in the air.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened, and it ended up going terribly.
Exactly.
I
know.
So frustrating.
It's rough. Now, in the following weeks, all governors and politicians appointed by Madero were either forced to swear loyalty to Huerta or be executed. Many chose execution, including Pancho's old pal, Abraham Gonzalez. Now, if you don't remember Abraham Gonzalez, he was the one who literally tapped on Pancho's shoulder at the beginning of the revolution, was like, Pancho, this is why we need to change the government.
Oh, he was like the recruiter for Pancho.
He was the recruiter, and he was also the governor of Chihuahua for a while. And then remember, it was like things were going well, but then Madero was like, no, we're going to take you out because
you piss off other people that are in my cabinet.
Exactly. Because Abraham Gonzalez was for the revolution. He was with Pancho when Pancho was trying to raid haciendas to give money back to the soldiers as a form of pension. And then Madero was like, you can't be doing that. And then took Gonzalez into Mexico City and took away his governorship. So by all accounts, Abraham Gonzalez was a pretty solid dude.
Yeah.
And so, basically he was one of the people that said, no way, man, I'm not going to swear loyalty to Huerta. And Huerta was like, cool, I'm gonna kill you. Now check this out. There are 3 versions of how Abraham Gonzalez may have been killed. 1, he was forced off of a train by some federal troops and shot. Number 2, same as version 1, only after he was shot, they threw his corpse onto the train tracks and ran over it with the train to hide the bullet holes. In version 3, he was simply handcuffed and pushed in front of an oncoming train. Brutal, dude.
Huerta seems like he might be even worse than...
I would say yes.
Porfirio.
Yes, I would say so, personally. Huerta was a psychopath.
Porfirio was just like a fattened dictator who didn't really give a shit about the people. But Huerta is like malicious.
And we'll get there too. The people didn't like Huerta. He was not in favor amongst the people.
Like,
they
it's
didn't
one
like
thing to just not care about your people, and it's another thing to pretty much like loathe them entirely.
Yeah. He was not in it for any particular reason other than I just want to be in power. That was like when we were talking an episode or 2 ago about Porfirio Diaz, where it was like, look, he wasn't a good guy. I didn't like him, but it would be a hard argument to make to say that he was not in at least the interest of Mexico as a whole. He may not have been a hero of the people, but he did want to see Mexico prosper in his own weird, twisted definition of that. I don't think that even Huerta was of that mindset.
No,
he was just like...
was pissed off at the people who already, in his mind, fucked him over.
Yes. I really do think so. So
this was a revenge plot.
Yes, it absolutely was. And it was, I think, especially with Abraham Gonzalez being such a big voice for the revolution, it was like, if you know the story of the Manson murders, when Charles Manson told his little cronies to go and kill people, he was like, make it witchy. It feels that way to me, where he was like, treat Gonzalez specifically bad, like do something nasty, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, any story that made its way back to Pancho was enough to light a vengeful fire under Pancho's ass. But any way you look at it, Madero's revolution had been destroyed, and Mexico now had a new dictator in Victoriano Huerta. Now, Huerta was generally despised by the people, being seen as a usurper without honor. His disdain amongst the people became so widespread that a song was soon composed to immortalize his image. That song was called La Cucaracha.
Really?
Yes. AKA the cockroach. Now, Kiva, if you'd like to read the Spanish version, you're much better at Spanish than I am, and then I'll read the English. And if you want to take a second to review it, you can.
Es muy bien. I'll just say it in rote, and I'm not going to sing it. But
you can. I was going to try to sing it a little bit, but it's up to you.
I'm going to mess it up. I'll get too tongue tied, but I'll just go. La cucaracha ya no puede caminar porque le falta marihuana pa quemar. Pobrecito de Madero, casi todos la han fallado. Huerta el ebrio bandolero es muy buen para el arrado. Which I'm not entirely sure how most of this translates.
Well,
marijuana que pa quemar?
I will read you the translation now. Okay. So in English, and it doesn't quite flow the same as it would in Spanish, because it's, the language is just the same, but I'll do my best here. So it'd be la cucaracha, he can't walk or stand upright because he's missing marijuana to set alight. And then, por forsaken, Señor Madero, almost everybody's gone by now. General Huerta, the drunken bandit, is just a donkey for the plow.
That's so crazy. Because think about how many times you've heard La Cucaracha and just like some dumb whatever. And this is like a political song.
It is literally them being like, he's a freaking cockroach dude.
He's like a drug-addled bandit who's taken over the government.
And he's so basically uptight, like he needs some weed to chill out. Like he can't walk or stand upright because he's missing marijuana. Like he just needs to relax, man. And he's screwing everything up.
And then they call him the drunken ebrio bandolero.
Yep, drunken bandit.
Yeah.
He's just a donkey for the plow. Like they're basically calling him a jackass.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is. I thought this was unbelievably cool and illuminating. I know. I didn't either. But yeah, La Cucaracha, that comes from the Mexican Revolution, and the people created this song to basically make fun of General Huerta, who they all despised. And not just because they didn't just call him the cockroach because they're like, oh, what a cockroach. They literally saw pictures of him. They're like, he kind of looks like a cockroach.
That's funny. Wow.
So there you go. Now,
it kind of reminds me
of
a story that my dad told me, that like other Cubans would like, this translates better in Spanish, but they're talking about, you're at a baseball game in Cuba, right? And Castro is, sitting in the baseball, in the stadium watching the game play, and he hears a guy selling peanuts, and he goes, peanuts. And he's like, quiet down. He's like, okay, sorry. And he walks away a little bit away from the dictator, and he starts yelling. He's like, peanuts. And Castro turns around and he goes, if you yell peanuts one more time, I'm going to kick you so hard you land in Miami. And then the entire stadium goes, peanuts. That's
pretty good.
Just like very serious situation, but like a way to like, laugh about it. Now I'm never going to think about that the same.
I know. I honestly, it was one of those where when I got into it, I was like, no way. Really? That's about... Wow.
Yeah, I always knew just the first verse, la cucaracha, ya no puede caminar. And then I didn't know the rest of it.
Yeah.
And the rest of it's very political, so.
Yep. There you go. Now you know. I thought that was a fun one.
Yeah.
Now, to many, the revolution appeared to be over. Madero was dead. Pancho was exiled in El Paso. Pascual Orozco was defeated and was actually now serving in the federal army. and the only one left still standing was Emiliano Zapata, but he was currently cornered and being hunted down in the state of Morelos. Now, Victoriano Huerta was now fully in control of Mexico and was even being backed by the federal army, the Catholic Church, and even the United States.
Wait, Huerta was backed by the Catholic Church?
Yes, he was.
That's some Leonardo da Vinci era shit. You know, that's some Medici level sponsorship.
Oh yeah. Now, if this were the Lord of the Rings, this would be where the Dark Lord Sauron was taking over Middle-earth and all hopes seemed to be lost until Galadriel poetically says, "But there were some who resisted."
Nice.
Only in the Mexican Revolution, we would have a man named Venustiano Carranza instead of King Elendil. Now, Venustiano Carranza had previously been appointed as a senator under Porfirio Diaz, but had joined the cause of revolution in 1908. After Madero became president, Carranza was elected as governor of Coahuila, and I'm fairly sure I'm saying that correct. It's a tough one.
Yeah, I don't know.
And despite Madero's orders, Carranza refused to dismantle the Revolutionary Army. This would eventually prove to be a great thing, as he was now the only person left with enough military might to denounce and oppose President Huerta. The only problem was Carranza had no previous experience when it came to military tactics. Some small skirmishes broke out, and they weren't exactly failures, but Carranza knew he needed someone not only to rally the people, but who also possessed a mind for leading a military offensive. Enter Pancho Villa.
Nice.
Now, over in El Paso, Pancho had heard about Carranza's new revolution and wanted in on the action, but didn't really know how to re-enter Mexico without being thrown back into jail. Soon, Carranza and Pancho were exchanging communication, and plans soon formed of Pancho joining up with the new revolution. He convinced Carranza to give him $1,000, or maybe pesos. I couldn't figure out what the actual currency was for that amount. So it might have been dollars, it might have been pesos, I'm not exactly sure. And the whole purpose of that was that he could re-enter Mexico and start building up an army. It was on March 6th, 1913, that Pancho crossed the Rio Grande, re-entering Mexico with just 7 men in tow. But by the end of 1913, Pancho would turn that group of 7 men into more than 20,000 soldiers.
It's like the Magnificent Seven.
Oh, goosebumps.
That's so cool.
But how did he do it? Well, the short answer is charisma. Pancho was just overflowing with it, and people were drawn to him. Additionally, Pancho had the reputation as a leader who actually took care of his men. Yes, he would raid haciendas, steal all their money, food, and supplies, but he only raided haciendas that supported President Huerta, and he would put most of that money towards supporting and feeding his troops.
Kind of like how Caesar managed to gain favor as opposed to the Roman Republic, where like, well, you know what? Caesar actually gives us spoils of war.
Yeah,
so
exactly. He shared the wealth kind of a thing and treated them decently, not as just like fodder to be killed kind of a thing, you know? Now, he was also known to keep his troops in line whenever they camped near a town. He dispensed harsh discipline on any of his men that would loot or commit any crimes. This did have a slight contradictory nature to it, as if he conquered a town, all bets were generally off, and his men could do what they wanted. For example, when he took over a hacienda, he was known to publicly humiliate the hacienda owner in front of their workers, forcing them to apologize in all manner of humiliating ways, which often ended in their execution.
Yeah.
In another example, Pancho forced a priest to publicly apologize for raping a young girl, and though Pancho wanted him shot, the townsfolk asked for mercy, and Pancho spared the raping priest. His deeds started to earn him the reputation of an avenger of the people, a true man of Mexico. But for Pancho, you weren't a true Mexican unless you were on the side of the revolution. I think in his mind, you were either with him or against him. If you were with him, you were treated well, but if you were against him, holy shit, look out. You know?
Yeah.
Now, another cool thing happened around this time, which was the U.S. electing President Woodrow Wilson, who, unlike his predecessor, did not see a dictator in Mexico as a good thing. President Wilson saw Huerta as a bloodthirsty tyrant, so he allowed funds and supplies to flow freely across the U.S.-Mexico border and into the hands of the revolutionary forces.
Hell yeah. America's #1 again. Let's go. We were always right.
Now, the army was growing, but Pancho had not yet won any major battles. There were a few other military leaders like Tomas Urbina and Manuel Chao, but neither had been appointed as a leader of the unified army known as but neither had been appointed as the leader of the unified army known as La División del Norte, or the Division of the North. Now, I should say really quickly about Tomas Urbina, who I'm going to talk about more in just a second here, but he was actually a longtime collaborator of Pancho from his bandit days.
Oh, really?
I don't know if you remember it, but there was one instance, I said it was in episode 1, where it was Pancho and somebody else, and they were asked by a hacienda owner to do some illegal work. Mm-hmm. And then the hacienda owner double-crossed them, didn't pay them, and then reported them to police and was like, oh yeah, go arrest these guys. And then they stormed on the hacienda, killed everyone, and got their money.
Yeah.
That other person was Tomas Urbina.
Gotcha. Okay. So he's been like a #1 Pancho fan since his criminal days.
Yes. Now, when it came to leading La División del Norte, Tomas Urbina was never really in contention, though, as he had a reputation for extreme violence and looting. But this other guy, Chao, he was a different story. And I did look it up. It is just pronounced Chao. I didn't know that that was a common last name in Mexico, but apparently it is.
How's it spelled?
Chao.
Huh.
Yeah. But if you kind of think about it, it's a Romance language, Spanish, Italian,
true.
Kind of a thing. I mean, it kind of makes sense that it would translate over somehow. But anyways, just wanted to make sure that clear. If I'm wrong, correct me. But I looked it up, and that was what I found. Now, Manuel Chao was a former school teacher. He was educated and well-liked, but lacking a certain ruggedness required for a military leader. Around the end of the summer in 1913, Pancho and Chao sat down to discuss who would be in charge. At first, Chao played the card of an intellectual, trying to outtalk and outthink Pancho, but Pancho brushed it off. Soon, Chao got frustrated and made a move towards the pistol strapped to his hip. But before Chao could wrap his fingers around the handle of his pistol, Pancho had already drawn his gun and pressed the barrel snug against Chao's forehead. Like a cliche from an old Western movie, negotiations were now over, and Pancho found himself in charge of some 6,000 troops, the Division of the North. Pancho even formed his own group of elite fighters that he called Los Dorados, the Golden Ones, whom he would dispatch for special missions.
That's sick.
Isn't that so cool? Like, so cool, dude. Now, to pay for the army, Pancho drew upon his past as a bandit, robbing trains, holding up stagecoaches, and forcing big hacienda owners to pay quote-unquote tributes of money to his army. On one occasion, Pancho robbed a Wells Fargo wagon that was carrying some 122 bars of silver and held the stagecoach driver hostage until Wells Fargo traded the bars of silver for cash. Now that Pancho was in charge, more and more volunteers started flooding in, and his army quickly grew from 6,000 to 8,000. To test their might, Pancho soon fixed his eyes on the city of Torreón, which was a major trading hub between the US and Mexico. His army was getting bigger, and he needed more supplies to feed and clothe them all, so Torreón was the perfect target. But when the commanding officer in charge of the federal forces in Torreón caught wind that Pancho and his army were planning an attack, he scoffed, assuming they were all a bunch of thugs with no military prowess. 500 federal troops were sent to intercept and supposedly destroy Pancho's army
of 20,000.
8,000 as of now. We're not at the end of the year. Needless to say, it was a slaughter, and Pancho's army started their advance on the city. It was on September 29th, 1913, that Pancho ordered the attack on Torreón. Pancho had learned a lot about military tactics since the start of the revolution, and at the siege of Torreón, he tried out a new strategy he had been developing that proved to be devastating and would from then on become his signature. His strategy could essentially be boiled down to 2 words: constant pressure. His front line of troops would attack for several hours and then be seamlessly replaced by a fresh group while those who had been previously fighting could head back to camp and rest up and eat.
They almost take shifts.
Exactly.
Interesting.
But relentlessly. So it was like, okay, so you guys are going to get replaced with them, and then they would just seamlessly switch, and then you go, and then now you guys, and he would just keep doing that. So it felt like the offensive never ceased. It was just constant, day and night, all day, all night, constantly being hammered with this army, basically.
Wow,
it's really pretty brilliant, honestly. I don't know why that wasn't a thing before.
So how did they get the provisions though? Was that from U.S. backing, or they picked that up in the last town?
So yeah, I mean, a lot of it was from U.S. backing. A lot of it was from when they would raid haciendas and steal their cattle and stuff like that. So that's where they got a lot of their stuff from. That was how they're kind of funded there. Pretty darn cool. Now, again, this would go on day and night, allowing the enemy no time to regroup or rest. Additionally, Pancho would send in small waves of cavalry every so often to charge into the enemy ranks and throw off their rhythm. Pancho also used the landscape to his advantage. Rather than having the troops form up in ranks, he would scatter them throughout the hills in bunches, offering the enemy no specific target to aim for. To make matters even worse for the federal forces, their own artillery commander was apparently not too bright, miscalculating the trajectory of his own cannons, and he ended up firing on his own troops.
Oh my God.
So Pancho got a little bit lucky in that the federal army was incompetent, basically.
Dude.
Now, the federal forces were overwhelmed. The general in charge was in panic, soon fleeing the city and leaving his troops to fend for themselves. So he literally abandoned his troops.
Wow.
Pretty lame. The federal forces were without a leader, low on morale, and soon surrendered. Upon taking the city, Pancho was deadly serious when it came to his troops' discipline. If they harmed any of the city's inhabitants or looted any of their houses or businesses, they would face execution. The federal troops they had fought weren't quite as lucky as the city's civilians, however. Every single officer was rounded up and executed, while the ordinary soldiers were given a choice: join up with Pancho's army or be killed with the officers. Most joined Pancho.
Interesting. That didn't lead to betrayal or anything like that? They just were like, okay, fine.
I mean, I think you have to think about it from their perspective, right? Which is they're like, I joined up with the army not because I was forced to most of the time. It was because, well, it would give me pay, it would give me stability, it would give me, yada yada yada, right? Like a food, a place to sleep,
like,
all this kind of stuff.
Oh, I'm surprised that it didn't lead to more infighting because you just killed all their war buddies and now they're. But I mean, that was the case for a lot of armies throughout all of history. So
right.
There might be some sort of unseen thought pattern that I'm not looking at.
Yeah. And I'm sure there was some sort of internal strife, but I think that the federal forces that joined up were so outnumbered by the revolutionary troops.
Yeah, it's true.
But there wasn't even room for it. Yeah, exactly.
I don't want to die.
Exactly. And they were like, hey, if I'm going to fight, I might as well fight for the side that's winning. I think that was a lot of their logic.
Probably.
Right? It was just, might as well go that way. Now, the victory at Torreon was Pancho's first major victory in the new revolution, and it proved that he was not only a military tactician not to be trifled with, but also a commanding leader. Pancho now controlled the city of Torreon, and with it, its railroads. This opened up all kinds of possibilities for Pancho, as he could now move troops and supplies much further and faster than ever before. And his troops became more and more willing to travel greater distances, as Pancho also allowed soldiers to bring their families with them when dispatched.
Like war camps.
Yeah. The wives of the soldiers kept morale high, providing companionship, delicious meals, and medical skills to the army. But Pancho also started to discover that the women were ferocious and eager to fight for their land and people. Soon, women were learning how to shoot, how to form military ranks, and fighting alongside their husbands in battle.
Fuck yeah, that's cool. That's actually really cool.
Sweet, right? The women in Pancho's army would become known to history as the soldaderas, or more commonly, adelitas. Pretty cool, right?
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah. Before he knew it, Pancho had assembled the single most powerful army in the Mexican Revolution, and it was continuing to grow. Oh, how cool is that?
That is really, it's just so cool. He doesn't have any of the decorum or, I don't know, the academic side of a tactician. Like no other military leader would be like, yeah, let's keep the women and the spouses in our military unit, or allow women to fight, but he had no preconceptions about any of this because he wasn't a military man in the first place. He just happened to be really good with tactics, and he was a bandit, and he was like, listen, if it works, it works.
Literally, yes. And like people like were basically coming to him and like, oh yeah, you know, my wife, she wants to fight too. And he was like, really?
Can she shoot?
Give him a rifle, see what they can do. And then is it like, you know, they would shoot and he'd be like, okay, a little bit like this. And they would just sort of train him to shoot and be like, dude, they're a good shot. Like, who am I to deny a woman coming to fight with us? And if your husbands are all cool with it at that time, right? Because that was a thing. Go for it. Cool. And it became like, and it is very cool, by the way. I might try to find a picture to show you. There are now statues in Mexico too, the soldaderas, and they look fucking awesome, dude.
What are the Adelitas? What does that translate to?
Adelita is, I looked it up, and I'm 90% sure of this. It basically is like a lady, right? Like
just like pretty ladies.
Hear me when I say that, right? Where like, oh yes, this this fine lady, right? Not just woman, but like, oh, she's a lady by title.
Gotcha.
Kind of a thing.
Yes,
right?
yes.
I'll have to double check on that when I actually edit through this episode, but I was 90%
sort of like a tongue in
sure.
cheek thing, being like, you know, the fine ladies are going to come fight for us, and it's, you know,
I think so.
Badass warrior women.
If anybody else has additional information, please let us know. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're correct on this. But yeah, that was what they were commonly called. So it was almost like a if it was reversed, they might be called the lords. Yeah. Right. Yeah, we're gonna have the lords come and fight for us. Right. We'd be like, oh, like the sort of appointed men kind of a thing. Right.
Yes.
So I think that's what it kind of translates to.
Gotcha.
Now, Pancho was starting to feel cocky, so he decided his next move would be to straight up take the capital city of Chihuahua, Ciudad Chihuahua. But after 3 full days of frontal attacks, the federal defense of Ciudad Chihuahua proved to be unbreakable. Pancho's army retreated, demoralized, and suffering many casualties. He needed a victory to win back his army, so he then decided to take Ciudad Juarez, the city he had helped Francisco Madero take only a few years earlier. But this was going to be tricky, as he knew the defenses were strong, and additionally was afraid of stray bullets going over the U.S.-Mexico border into El Paso, and thereby creating an enemy in the U.S.
They're that close, huh?
It's a border city. It's literally separated by the Rio Grande.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's literally, from El Paso, people could literally stand on top of buildings and watch the fighting in Juarez, Ciudad Juarez. Yeah, it's literally that close. And I want to say, generally speaking, it's only about maybe 30 yards long, the like wide, the river. So it's like you could swim across it easily.
Yeah.
And they did a lot. So pretty wild. Now, once again, Pancho reached into his bag of tricks, this time churning up inspiration from the Iliad and the story of the Trojan horse. Only instead of a Trojan horse, Pancho would use a train. See, Pancho had caught wind that a supply train was headed for Ciudad Juarez. So just before midnight on November 14th, 1913, Pancho and his troops stopped the train a few hours outside of the city. His troops quickly removed all of the supplies, and some 2,000 revolutionary troops got on the train. Pancho then had the train conductor send word to the city, saying that all was well, and the train was on its way once again. At approximately 2 a.m. on November 15th, the train rattled to a stop at the train depot in the heart of Ciudad Juarez. The commanding federal officers in the city were either sleeping, getting drunk at a saloon, or enjoying some companionship at a local bordello, while their armies casually kept watch around the city's perimeter. Once again, Pancho was cunning like a fox, and rather than having his men scream and shout, they all quietly disembarked from the train, fanning out across the entire city and quickly moving to key locations. In just 10 minutes, his troops had managed to secure huge portions of the city without firing a single shot.
That's sick.
But their presence was eventually noticed, and a battle did break out. But it almost didn't matter. The federal forces were overwhelmed, and the fighting lasted just 3 hours before the city surrendered.
I mean, they're already there. What are you going to do?
How cool is that?
That
dude?
is really cool. Super like modern sort of tactical approach. Like I'm thinking like, you know, the US with like an Osprey, like dropping off like, you know, 5 people in a specific location to take over. That's so cool.
So cool, dude. Like, just gives me the fizz. Now, just like he had done before, Pancho had the officers of the Federal Army executed, but this time he spared one man named Francisco Castro, as Castro had been the very man who had spared Pancho's life about a year earlier when Pancho was facing a firing squad at the orders of Victoriano Huerta.
That's kind of cool.
Pretty radical, right? He knew him.
That
He
sounds
was
like something from a movie.
Yes, he was like, oh, you're actually a good man. You spared my life. You listened to me. You let me send that telegram to Madero, which then ultimately parlayed my sentence into jail sentence. And I'm alive because of you right now.
Yeah.
You're
You're good to go.
You're good. Like, pretty sweet, dude. Pretty freaking sweet. But now that he had this city, he had to defend it. About a week later, Pancho caught wind that the federal forces were coming to take the city back. Rather than preparing for a siege, Pancho decided to meet the Federales in the field at a place called Tierra Blanca, which was mostly sand dunes. And that Tierra Blanca means white earth, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
He positioned his troops high so as to create pools of federal troops at the bottom of the dunes that could be easily picked off. The fight was tough, with both sides suffering fairly large amounts of casualties. Eventually, Pancho shut the whole thing down by loading up a kamikaze train loaded with dynamite and setting it on a collision course with another train filled with federal reinforcements.
That's like the second time he's done that.
Yeah, it's now like a new move. The battle was over, and the Federales retreated. But there was one particular standout in the battle, in a man named Rodolfo Fierro. Earlier, in the Battle of Tierra Blanca, a train was inbound filled with federal reinforcements, but they couldn't stop it. Pancho and some other horse-mounted fighters watched as Fierro galloped alongside the train, leapt from his horse to the front of the train, killed the crew of conductors, forcing the train to a stop, and allowing Pancho and his men to decimate the train full of Federales.
Whoa.
How badass is that?
That is another thing that's like, that should only happen in movies, right?
Literally. I was like, no.
It's like Legolas taking down the Oliphant and
100%, man.
That's sick.
It literally is like, that's why we were talking earlier about cowboys. And I'm like, see, these people actually did this
These
stuff.
are cowboys.
These are cowboys right here, man. That didn't happen in the US. Like, nobody was doing, like, in our wildest dreams and fantasies, maybe it happened like once or something. These people were like, nah, we got to do this. We got to take down this train of federal troops to stop them. Like, and he's riding alongside the train,
riding alongside the train, and then
leaps from his horse onto the train.
He could have been, run over. That
how cool is that?
Fights the conductors, pulls the brake.
Yup, forces it to a stop early before they can actually get to the battle, and then they're able to take them all down.
That's gnarly.
Unbelievably cool.
Fierro, you said?
Fierro, Rodolfo Fierro. And we'll talk about him in just a second as well. Now, Pancho respected Fierro's courage so much that he added him to the Los Dorados, or I should say Los Dorados, I don't need the in there. Which again, the golden ones, that's his elite group of fighters. But this would ultimately prove detrimental to Pancho's image, as Fierro had a reputation for extreme violence.
Oh.
As an example, on one occasion, Fierro was holding 100 prisoners captive. He said he would let them go, but in groups of 10, with their ticket to freedom being at the end of a long field with a wall at the end. The catch was that Fierro would use them as target practice as they ran towards the wall.
That's insane.
Ultimately, 99 out of 100 prisoners would be shot and killed before reaching the wall. So freaking insane. Like, that's sadistic.
Squid Games.
Literally Squid Games. Like,
yeah,
pretty nasty.
That's so gnarly.
So those who opposed Pancho would use these types of stories to fuel the fire of anti-Villa propaganda. So you can kind of see why.
Yeah.
Not great. So now that Pancho had decimated the federal forces at Tierra Blanca, the capital city of Ciudad Chihuahua was basically his for the taking. Less than 200 federal troops remained in the capital, so Pancho and his men basically walked right in, and the city was theirs. Because Pancho now controlled the capital city of Chihuahua, he was now the default governor of the state of Chihuahua.
That's insane, bro.
I told you we were getting there. I was like,
He's not,
hang on.
Not really a governor, more like feudal lord, because it wasn't approved by Huerta, who's technically president or
No,
whatever.
but that's the point. Is they now the revolution controlled the state, and they don't recognize Huerta as president. So from their perspective, they're like, this needs law. We need a governor. We sure as shit aren't going to get it from Huerta. So I am the governor because there's nothing else we can really do right now.
That's crazy.
So it was de facto. It was like, yeah, no, you're the governor now.
You're the governor.
Yep. Like, so with that,
I just, as an American, it's always really to like imagine that the governor is a position you could fight to get. Like,
I mean, if you think about it, just a few minutes back, right? It was like the presidency was a position you could fight to get. Huerta literally overthrew the government and was like, I'm president now, bitches. And like, that was that. They were like, okay, yeah, I guess it's your president.
You're president.
Like, the end. So like,
dude,
pretty crazy.
What a crazy story.
Isn't this insane?
It really is. I mean, sometimes truth is better than fiction.
Almost always, if you ask me. I gotta be honest.
Like,
the more that I read stuff like this, the more I'm like, this is so like awesome. It's cooler than any war movie I've ever seen. It's like, it's reading it. It felt like it was like somebody took the best bits from all the different war movies and were like, yeah, we're gonna put this together, but nobody's gonna believe it.
Yes,
because it's too much.
Yes,
it's
it does seem
too
like too
many
much.
crazy stories. But we know that this was true, and we know
a train car loaded with dynamite, like
literally,
like, guy running up to the train, taking out the conductor. That's like such a classic, like John Wayne scenario.
Totally. Even like Huerta overthrowing the government and betraying Madero along the way to get there to do the thing, and then positioning the other armies to get into. It's crazy, dude. Like the amount of stuff is just completely crazy to me. It's been so fun to research this stuff and unbelievable. Like I could not believe it when I was reading through all this. I was like, no way. This is, it almost feels like too good to be true. Not good, but you know what I mean? Like it's so much good story.
I was also thinking the same thing. I was like, this is such a cool story. I'm also kind of sad that it is a real story.
Exactly.
Because it is, zoomed out. Very fun, very entertaining. Zoomed in, obviously, there's like
tragedy,
very tragic. But I mean, it is like an old Western.
It is.
I mean, one way or another.
Super cool. Now, in regards to Pancho becoming governor, this wasn't exactly an aspiration of his, and knew that being basically illiterate wasn't doing him any favors. So he hired a personal assistant / advisor to help him out. Once in the seat of governor, Pancho rapidly enacted 3 policies. Number 1, all land belonging to enemies of the revolution would be taken back and, after the revolution, given back to the people. Number 2, schools would be constructed throughout the state and free education would be given. And number 3, his troops were strictly forbidden from consuming alcohol, and policing would be increased throughout the state to help protect the people.
Ooh, I feel like that one's not going to go well.
No, I think it would, because he basically
the troops didn't get pissed off about that. I mean, I'm sure they griped about it, but did they not like?
I mean, I don't think they were happy, but I think that it was like, hey, it is what it is.
That's probably smart. Also, it was cool to see that education was on his priority list whatsoever.
He was so I will say, Pancho. It's hard to say that he was illiterate because he was his whole life trying to get better at reading, but later on, we're going to kind of learn about how it felt like he was kind of like a 3rd grader trying to read.
Yes.
Where when he would read something, he'd spell it out loud. So he'd be like, the people of the state. Like,
yes.
He would read it like that, to where to say that he couldn't read is technically not correct, but it was, again, probably
it was a real struggle for
2nd
him.
or 3rd grade. And so he always had this thing of just being like, I was stripped as a child of being able to even just learn how to read. When I was in El Paso, everybody was walking around with newspapers, reading them, no problem.
I felt like an idiot not being able to do that, so I want to change that for other people.
Exactly.
That's cool, man.
So he really did want to give that to people, because he was like, and then even going back to his bandit days, where he was like, I can't get a clerk's job because I can't friggin' read, because nobody gave me the opportunity to have an education. So I think he really always had that in his head of like an insecurity, and something that he wanted to change and give back to the people was education, which is pretty darn cool.
That's cool.
Again, Pancho is not a perfect guy and did a lot of terrible things, but that's why I say, like, when this stuff happens, I'm like, come on, you can't argue with that. Like, that's really cool.
Like, I can see how some people do, like, put him on a pedestal,
Yes.
see him as a hero.
Right.
I can see how people can see that.
And they don't want to accept his bad sides.
Yes.
Because the good stuff
that's
he did was
exactly
so good.
what we were just talking about with like cowboys and stuff like that.
Exactly.
A lot of folks who really idealize the American West really love the cool, fun parts about it. The freedom, the open, the open road, that sort of thing. And it's really hard to like accept the bad parts while still enjoying it. So some people just choose to pretend like it didn't happen.
Yeah,
so,
totally. Now, in regards to the whole forbidding his troops from drinking alcohol, okay, contrary to what you may have imagined about Pancho Villa, he rarely drank alcohol. And if he ever did, it was in very, very small amounts.
Really?
Yes. Some people say he didn't drink. I don't think that that's true.
He probably had like a little nip of tequila every once in a while.
Correct. But I think he was one of the very few exceptions. Maybe that's not fair to say. He was one of the people that just looked at alcoholism and went, you're not yourself when you do this. You're not in your right mind when you do this. You can't think straight when you do this. So I'm not going to be one of those people. And he wanted to keep his mind sharp.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was not a drinker. And again, if he ever did, it was rare. And it would be like, hey, look, fine, I'll take a shot with you to celebrate this thing that we did. And I'm done. Like there's nothing else. Like, it's the end kind of thing.
It's funny how he's in no way a military man, but he kind of does have like the trimmings of one. Like he seems like just by almost coincidence, like what bandit growing up in Mexico who can't read very well, who's doing crime all the time, doesn't, get wasted after it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of an odd coincidence that he ended up in the position that he was.
And I think we talked about this a little bit in the first episode where because a lot of people in Mexico had bad jobs, they didn't get paid very well, they were uneducated because education was taken away from them.
Yeah,
there was a stereotype that started to emerge of, this sounds crass, but it is accurate, the drunken Mexican, right?
Yeah.
And I think...
we had the same thing with natives, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people still have that same prejudice with like, black folks here in the U.S., and there's a mix there, because like, I don't know, I've lived in like pretty poor neighborhoods, and I just feel like per square foot there's like 6 times more liquor stores, in poor neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I don't think that's a coincidence.
Yeah.
I think like when you have like, nothing, no opportunities, no advantages, nothing going for you outside of what you have to do right in front of you every single day, alcoholism can be a really easy way to slip into, avoiding problems that you're dealing with that you have no control over.
Right. And I think for somebody like Pancho, I think growing up seeing that, he just was like, I don't want to be part of this. Right. I don't want to be one of those people. So I think he, from a very young age, was like, I don't want to fall into alcohol. And so he never was, which I will be honest and say, like, in my weird, before I read anything about him, I was like, oh, come on. Of course. He's like a tequila swilling crazy bandit. Nope. Not him. And he was actually known for, like, throughout this entire time too, like one of his signature things that he would wear a 3-piece suit everywhere he would go.
Yes.
Like that was Pancho Villa. Mm-hmm. So again, it's really shifted my perspective on like a lot of him in this whole time. And yeah, it's just been a very illuminating kind of experience.
Yeah.
To
and
really
we kind of talked about it a little bit with Jack Daniels, with like alcoholism being not only like, what working class folks tend to lean towards, but also what industry tends to pitch to those people.
Yeah.
Intentionally. Like when we were talking about like the whole firewater thing, right? With like Native Americans, they were literally just giving these people, the most poisonous crap, likely most addictive garbage that they had just sitting around that they would have thrown away otherwise.
Yep. Laced with like formaldehyde and stuff. It's nasty.
I could totally see Pancho being like, you know what? I don't want any part of this.
Yeah, exactly. So. Now, it's also worth mentioning that Pancho had developed a pretty deep hatred of the Spanish over the years after learning about their treatment of the people of Mexico for the past several hundred years. So they were banished from the state of Chihuahua. Pancho also banished all Chinese people.
What?
But we really don't know why.
Like, you, get out of here. And he's like, what did I do?
Yeah.
I knew there was like a lot of Chinese workers in the, Old West or whatnot.
Yeah. My personal theory as to why he banished all Chinese people is that Pancho felt they were taking away work from the Mexican people.
Maybe, yeah. He's a bit of a nationalist.
But we don't. People can't really figure it out because there's not been any evidence that we've ever been able to find that's like, oh yeah, he really just hated Chinese people. It wasn't. He
like, what did this come from?
Openly hated the Spanish, but he was like, also the Chinese, you got to go. So I don't know why.
Like, shit, man, I guess.
Yeah. So they had to leave the state, at least anytime they would find him or whatever, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But regardless, Pancho's policies were well received by both lower and upper class. In general, the people of Chihuahua were happy with Pancho. By this point, word of Pancho's daring exploits and rise from military leader to governor were becoming international headlines. To get a first-hand account of the story, a magazine from New York called Metropolitan decided to send a war correspondent to get eyes on the Mexican Revolution and hopefully get an interview with the notorious Pancho Villa. The war correspondent sent was a man named John Reed.
Yep, there we go. Another. That's so crazy.
John Reed was a well-respected journalist known for his reporting on various labor rights protests and was passionate about workers' rights and revolutions in general, so he was the perfect person for Metropolitan to send. And one funny little thing about John Reed at the time, though, was his girlfriend, who had a bit of a reputation for being strong-willed and insisted that she come along with John for his reporting on the Mexican Revolution. John Reed's girlfriend at the time was none other than Mabel Dodge Lujan.
Yep. How does that happen, bro? How does that happen? It's always, she shows up everywhere, even though she's not even a particularly remarkable character herself.
No, she just wanted to be a part of everything, which is what makes her so fascinating. It was like, she wasn't this great person at all. She wrote a couple of pretty good books, but nothing insane. Tried to do a lot of things, never really succeeded, but she was everywhere. Like, she just was everywhere. And I don't know why, and it's amazing, and it makes me so happy.
Cheers to you, Mabel.
And for any of our new listeners, Mabel Dodge Lujan was the first series we ever did on the biographers. It is a very fascinating tale, what she did. Kind of became one of the sort of more famous people in the sort of history of New Mexico.
She's like the Kim Kardashian of the New West.
I think that's pretty fair to say. She was like one of the original influencers. You know, she didn't exactly do anything herself, but she let a lot of people know about a lot of other stuff. And like, you know,
social
a lot of people knew her name.
Crossed over, yeah.
But anyways, that just makes me so happy.
So, did she actually get to meet Pancho?
No.
Oh, yes, because he was like, no, dude, I'm not taking you into a war zone.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yeah. So John did allow Mabel to accompany him, but forced her to stay behind in El Paso, as he said it was simply too dangerous for her to come to Mexico. So no, Mabel never did get to meet Pancho Villa, but she was close. Like literally 100 yards away from meeting Pancho Villa. Like, she was literally in El Paso with John Reed. They were looking across the Rio Grande, and he
might
was
have even
there.
seen him like walk out of a building at some point.
Almost definitely, yeah. So yeah, she didn't meet him, but I'm almost definitely sure she saw him at some point.
That's funny,
which is pretty insane. Now, John Reed's reporting on Pancho are some of the most important we have, and many of the stories we know about Pancho come directly from John Reed. He first met Pancho on December 24th, 1913, and he would describe Pancho as, quote, the most natural human being I have ever met. He doesn't speak much and is so calm that he appears shy. His eyes are never still, absolutely hot and steely. He walked a little pigeon-toed, having spent so much time on horseback. He is a terrible man, and no one dares disobey his orders. It is interesting to see him read, or rather hear him, for he has to sound the words out aloud. So that's how we get that information, is from John Reed.
From Mabel Dodge's ex-boyfriend.
Ex-boyfriend, yeah. Pancho was so impressed with John Reed that he allowed John to accompany him unrestricted for the next 4 months. And it is from John that we get so much insight into Pancho, his thoughts and ideas, his soldiers and soldaderas. The importance of John Reed's reporting on Pancho Villa simply cannot be understated, or overstated, rather. But Pancho's time as governor would be short-lived, lasting only from December 8th of 1913 to January 7th of 1914. It's just about a month, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, really,
But
really
still,
pretty short.
yeah, as a stand-in.
The leader of the new revolution, Venustiano Carranza, didn't like that one of his generals was now a politician, seeing it as a threat to his own political ambitions. So he asked Pancho to step down. Pancho seemed to be pretty okay with this, as he never really saw himself as a political leader, and in his place, the aforementioned Manuel Chao took over. This meant that Pancho could once again lead the division of the North and take down Victoriano Huerta. Even more, Pancho was starting to feel more egotistical and emboldened than ever before, as he was not only receiving funding from Venustiano Carranza and the US government, he had also recently signed a deal with the Mutual Film Corporation that gave him $25,000 upfront in addition to 20% of all revenue generated from his films. That's right, Pancho Villa, who started as a farmer, then turned to the life of a bandit, then to the life of a revolutionary before becoming a military leader, and eventually the governor of Chihuahua, was about to become a movie star. And that's where we'll pick back up for part 4 of Pancho Villa.
Hit the post right there. That was perfect. Perfect way to end that. That was incredible, man. I know why you like this episode so much.
I told you, dude. I was like, episode 3 is where it's at. It's got so much good stuff.
You know what? I'm actually excited to see him become a movie star. I just think that's so funny. I don't know why.
It's a wild story. Really, really wild.
I just imagine him with just these kind of soft, silk handkerchief, directors and producers. Meanwhile, this guy has killed several men with his bare hands.
Yeah. No, and you're not wrong. That's pretty accurate in terms of what happens is you have these kind of meek, I want to make my movie. See, come on, hey, Pancho, what do you think here? And he's like, talk to me like that again, I'll shoot you in the head. And I'm like, oh. It's pretty crazy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we'll get into it in the next episode, but it's he's like, fine, if you want me to take you in a battle, I'll take you in a battle, and here's what I want from it, kind of a thing. And they're like, yeah, of course, this will be great. And
they're
then,
oh God,
dude,
he's bleeding.
What they end up seeing is just oh gnarly. My God. We didn't really understand until we got here, kind of a thing, how brutal this was going to be and how dangerous this actually is. And there's also a lot of misconceptions about that kind of period of history, or this little story of Pancho in the movies. So I'll try to break it down as best I can. Some of my sources gloss over it. Some of my sources go into it a little bit more in depth. I will say up front, and I've mentioned this before, there is a movie on, I think it's just now Max, not HBO Max, called and starring Pancho Villa as himself, where Antonio Banderas plays Pancho.
And you said it was kind of accurate, kind of not, but mostly entertaining, right?
Yeah. And I think they take certain liberties in terms of how they all started to work together or whatever. But I would say in general, it will give you a good feeling of how it was going on and whether or not I do think Antonio Banderas hams it up a little too much as Pancho.
Sure.
Because from what I understand and what I've read about him, even from John Reed's description, he seems very calculated a lot of times. He's described as almost quiet, seeming shy. Exactly, where he can give you a look and you know everything. In the movie, Antonio Banderas is very flamboyant about everything. He talks of himself in the third person constantly. Oh, if Pancho Villa wants to do this, Pancho Villa will do this. It's a little silly, but the spirit is right.
Yeah,
you know,
And I get it.
Even
I'll probably still give it a watch just because it sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's not bad, and especially after episode 4 that we go through, I think you could watch it and go, oh, "Okay, I see where they went with this or whatever." And I will even say I was very happy because I was watching the movie and I was like, "He better be here. He better be here." There's John Reed. He's in the movie.
That's so weird.
It's crazy
because once you do these biographies, you feel like you know people personally.
Yeah.
I saw a Tesla book at Barnes & Noble the other day, and I was like, hey, my boy.
Right? That's how I feel about Mabel. Mabel's my girl, man. Every time I see anything about her, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, Mabel.
Yeah, legit.
And so, anyway, yeah, episode 4 here, we're going to get into a little bit more of that movie-making stuff and sort of how the revolution continues on. And I'm still not sure if this is going to be a 5 or 6 part series. It might end up being 6 parts. I will say the second half of the revolution from 1915 to 1920 is a little bit more political than it is battle-ridden.
Gotcha.
There are still more battles and stuff. It might allow me to accelerate, but it just kind of depends on how much detail I want to put in there. So
that's fair.
Throwing that out now. But that being said, I do want to make sure that I'm telling the most accurate version of the Mexican Revolution, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to just be like, he wasn't as part of much, so we'll just move past. Like, I do want to still give people the flavor of what really happened throughout the last 5 years of the Mexican Revolution. So I'll do my best. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to tie it up, but
for sure.
There it is.
Dude, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, I thought you would like this one. I was like, how could you not? It's too much fun stuff. Like it's rooting and tooting and jumping from trains and Trojan horsing and all this kind of stuff. It's like, it was so fun to get through, you know. Glad you liked though.
Yeah, man.
All right, well, we will wrap it up there, everybody. Again, appreciate y'all for listening. Hope you enjoy the show and the series so far. If anybody feels like supporting our cause, you can do so on our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. For any questions, comments, or corrections, you can send us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on social media, places like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, or you can go to our website, thebiographerspodcast.com. And then, like always, we always like to give a little shout out to Akiva's website. Sounds like you're moving and grooving a little bit more with knives.
Yeah, man. So I have probably either anywhere from 9 to 12, depending on some other folks might have wanted to buy stuff during the show. I have anywhere from 9 to 12 knives that are going to be on the website by the time this episode drops. You can go ahead, sign up for my newsletter, and also use the code BIOGRAPHERS to get 10% off whenever you order any knife, which is a pretty considerable chunk depending on the knife that you buy.
Heck yeah.
And also the newsletter will let you know when things, kick off. That's attached to my Instagram, Metalwork by Miola. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, which your website is metalworkbymiola.com, MEOLA. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably going to be it. So we'll let all y'all go. Again, thanks for listening, everybody. And do remember, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya.
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.